The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Depending on where you're logging in from today, one of those will sound just about right. Welcome back to another great episode of our Best Practices webinar series with 7Signal. If you'd like to, let us know where you're working from today. If you're in the States, if you're international, if you are working from home, if you're in the office. Let us know where you're tuning in from. I am back in the Cleveland headquarters office where I'm in a huge fleece jacket trying to stay warm in the snow. And I am joined today by our special speaker, Chris Minton. How are you today, Chris?
I'm good. I've got my jacket on because it's 75 here in Texas, so I'm freezing too.
Oh, I bet. We are also joined by Jim Vajda again, who is in Cincinnati. How are you today, Jim?
I'm good. It's cold down here, but the sun's out, so I'm not going to complain.
Awesome. All right, I see a lot of you dropping in here. We have Pete working from home in snowy Boston. Thanks, Pete. We have Wayne working in the office today from Denver. We have Michael working from North Carolina, working from home. And a lot of other people dropping in here. Continue to do so, and we will go ahead and get started. So we have a great topic here today, great response for this, understanding the RF link between the AP and client device. And as I mentioned, we are joined today by Chris Minton, our solutions engineer at 7Signal, and Jim Vajda, and Jim, your title isn't even correct here, but the Chief Wireless Officer at 7Signal. And I'm Kelsey Rizzuto, the marketing specialist here. Really excited to dive into this and see what questions we get from the audience as we move forward. Couple of announcements before we begin. We do partner with CWNP, as always, for every single one of our webinars. So if you're pursuing a certification and would like to receive CE credits for attending today's webinar, just drop us a message and we can easily send over a PDF certificate to you. Additionally, we send out a newsletter every other Wednesday. So if you are not currently receiving that and would like to, we will drop a link in here for you to sign up for our mailing list. And in those newsletters, we love to send out articles to our community of Wi-Fi engineers, survey questions, just to really gauge the state of Wi-Fi in the industry. Another announcement worth mentioning, 7Signal has been added and is now available to the Synnex Corporation's GSA schedule. Moving forward here, we also host a product tour every single Friday at 12 noon Eastern. We'll go ahead and drop that link to register in the chat here as well if you'd like to stay up to date with all things Mobileye and Sapphire Eye from 7Signal. We also post all of our webinar slides to our Twitter account. So if you're on there, go ahead and give us a follow at 7Signal. But we also send out a follow-up email to all of our registrants with the slides from today's presentation, so you can receive those that way as well. Additionally, we post all of our recordings from our presentations to our YouTube channel. So today's broadcast will be up there later this afternoon, and you can go ahead and watch some of our previous topics that we've covered as well. And if you're able to, subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay up to date with all of our topics that we post there, and also our Twitter account, because you never know when we'll be giving away some more 7Signal merchandise this year. Another great announcement here, we're really proud of this and excited. This is coming up, the first virtual user group of 2021 on Wednesday, February 17th. From 10:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So we'll go ahead and drop that registration link in here as well if you care to register. But this is a great way for us to link up industry experts, customers, peers, to learn about how to elevate your organization's Wi-Fi performance initiatives. We'll also dive into the 7Signal product roadmap. We'll have a customer panel, and we'll have an ROI analyst speaking as well from IDC. So this is a great way to link up those of you more on the technical side of the business, but also due to the ROI and the finance that we're going to be diving into, this reaches out to all other areas of the organization. So ask your colleagues to join, send this over to your peers, and we look forward to seeing you on Wednesday, February 17th. A quick overview of 7Signal before we begin. We were established in 2007 in Helsinki, Finland, and we're now located in Cleveland, Ohio. We've hit a lot of major milestones along the way, including 14 patents, which goes to show that the technology you see from 7Signal, you're only going to see from 7Signal. So just to give you a little more background as to what makes us so different, if you look at your typical enterprise LAN infrastructure, you've already got great tools and technologies installed on the network, giving you really useful feedback and data, such as your Cisco, Aruba, Riverbed, Apneta, and more. But we move into a different space, picking up where they leave off with Mobileye, which lives on the edge of the network on the individual devices, giving you full visibility into the user experience from the outside in. Mobileye can also be installed on ultimately any mobile device, from laptops, pickers and scanners, your mobile phones, workstation on wheels if you're in the healthcare space, and additionally can be installed on any Mac OS, Linux, Android, or Windows device. Additionally, with Mobileye, as many of us on the line here are working from home, we can gain that visibility into your external home networks to gauge that Wi-Fi performance as well, giving you full visibility no matter where you're logging in from. Additionally, we have Sapphire Eye, which are our sensors for service level quality and RF visibility. And through this combination, you're really getting great perspective that you just can't find anywhere else. All right, thanks for letting me run through that background before we begin. But before we pass the controls over to Chris here, we're going to launch a trivia question for our audience today. And this did not work. There we go. Okay, can you see this question here?
Mhm.
Awesome. All right, let's see here. What is the average lifespan of home use router?
Yeah, it looks like we went right to the response. Can we maybe start it over?
Let's see here. We might be having some technical issues here. If you know the answer to this question, you can go ahead and drop it in the questions or the chat panel. We have our options of 20,000 hours, 10,000 hours, or 58,000 hours.
Yeah, I see the answer streaming in there.
Awesome. All right. Thank you guys for dropping those answers in there. All right, Chris, how are we doing on this question? What can we explain to the audience here?
Yeah, most common response is 20,000 hours.
Got a smart group here. Yep. About 5 years is what they say. They also say, they being the broader community and the vendors themselves, is to replace them every 2 years. So we'll talk about that here in a second as well.
Awesome. All right, thank you to all of you for dropping in those answers there. And we're going to go kick it off and hand the controls over here to Chris so we can dive into this presentation.
Great. So can you guys see my background, and can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. So I am extremely excited to talk about this this webinar with you guys today. This is going to be a lot of fun. Just real quick about me, I've been in the business for a while, done quite a bit. All these pictures show me around people, and it makes me uncomfortable just because of COVID now. Yeah, I'm not doing as much traveling like most of you guys are anymore as well, doing a lot of work from home, and that's what we're going to be referring to. But I've always been in the network space and security and cloud, and I've always just veered to wireless security and cloud has just always been a passion of mine. And it's great to be here at 7Signal. And I'm here to talk today about these topics, and we're going to do this pretty quickly. And the main takeaway, because I know it's very hard to keep keep focus on a webinar for more than just a few minutes, but is to check your devices at home. We're going to focus on working from home, not only for you, but for your customers as well. All of us are really working from home full time now. My main thing to you, if you guys remember, is to check to see how old your Wi-Fi or your home router or your Wi-Fi router is from your cable provider, and go check to see what your network interface cards are and when have they been upgraded. And also find something to continually monitor your RF. It can be a free tool, it can be a purchase tool, but wireless is a medium that is always in flux. And I come bringing props as always. I was a wired engineer before, so obviously this is a Cat 6E cable, twisted pair. Having a wired connection and then even having like the audacity to call wireless Ethernet is just terrible, because the more you look into wireless and just the medium, how different it is from having just a nice, beautiful, nice connection through a patch cable. And so I'm talking to you today from about maybe 8 feet from where I could patch in, but I don't, like most of you guys do. And a lot of times we forget that wireless has so much different contention to deal with than wired networking. And we also forget that it's always in flux and it's always changing. It's never the same. I'm so used to being a wired engineer for a lot of my career that I never think about, with this, if I'm plugged in, I've basically got my own virtual connection. My node, my endpoint is really just worried about, unicast, multicast, and broadcast. I've got collision detection going on, and I don't think about anything. When I start to change things, like we'll talk about here, like network interface cards, things change quite a bit. When I change position, locations, you guys get it. So I want to. That's the main thing that I wanted to say, is that wireless is obviously not a completely different rule sets than wired. It's always changing, and you need to keep your devices updated, right? So let's move in here. Make sure I've got my laser pointer going. Excuse me. So I took the liberty to get some marketing material, and I love looking back in the past to see what if something happens, accurately in the future. So this is from 2016, and it says, household will have 10 connected devices now, and will rise to 50 by 2020. I always tell my kids, if anybody says something in 50 years, in 50 years it's going to be X. Keep it with a modem of caution. And then here we have one on the 19th or 2019 of December, and it said U.S. households have an average of 11 connected devices. So that's a little bit off. And 5G should push that even higher. So I'm sensing a theme here, and you'll have to forgive my poking fun at marketing just a little bit. No offense, Kelsey and everybody, but it's what was caused this to rise to 50. Back then, it was the Internet of Things. Last year, or in 2019, it was going to be 5G, right? So let's use my network for an example, just like yours. So I took this morning. I have 16 devices connected, which is a little bit over than what they say is the average, which you would expect that as a wireless guy. And you would expect that from somebody working from home and also have 2 kids in school from home. But I have more than one basically wireless access point, more than one BSSID. I have a couple. And so there's actually more to the air as well. So I want to talk about common home WLAN design. And you'll notice that I mentioned that I have a Google Mesh network. This isn't Nest, because that's version 2. This is Mesh. So my primary, just like a lot of people that are in the Mesh network, does a backhaul in the 2.4 gig. That's important. Also think about how your devices are in your environment, and then also your customers, the people that you support, how their environment's set up. So I've got a mesh endpoint here. I've got one in the office, and then I have my head node here in the living room. So you can probably notice right off the bat, and Jim, don't worry about that 250. That's that Sapphire Eye that's unplugged. This was an older picture. That 250 is connected and up and running. So just didn't want to. So I have, like most people, all of my head in. There's my Google. You can actually kind of see it if you kind of creep a little bit. It's behind the TV in a wooden offset entertainment center. Basically, I've got almost all of the mediums covered here. I've got wood, I've got glass, I've got plastic, I've got sheetrock. And why do I have this as a person who does wireless engineer all the time? Well, the devices are aesthetically pleasing, but for my personal use, or what I've been told, is that all the blinky lights basically keeps everybody up. And as silly as that sounds, being a professional, it is true. My dogs, when they see the flashing lights, they start to growl and bark in the kennels. It actually kind of lights up the room. Being an engineer, I like blinky lights. Having a family of, of younger kids, and a wife that works, and me that works, it's something that we do. So I have thrown all of that stuff into the back, and this is we're talking about how the sausage is made, right? So this is warts and all, and I hasten to state that some people on this line probably have this kind of same setup too, right? And people that are not into the IT business but are working from home, they more than likely have their environment set up. So I have a 2100. This is a Sapphire Eye. There's my cable modem. There's a consumer grade power over Ethernet switch. That is my Spectrum. That's the Wi-Fi access point that was given to me by the provider. It has a 2.4 and a 5 radio. And then again, there's my Google head-in. So Jim, just out of curiosity, what would you think, besides the ugliness of this, what would you think some of my problems would be?
Well, the TV is going to be the most significant issue, not just being plastic and metal and maybe not glass. I don't know if there's glass in flat screens, but at least not the cheap ones I buy. But the electromagnetic fields it creates are going to wreak havoc. It's going to be pretty rough on the old Wi-Fi, and you're doing mesh. So if that's your root bridge, then all your traffic is going to be affected by it.
I really have noticed since I put this in this environment that my SNR is just terrible, and my Apple MacBook, when I move over to here, it starts to have many issues. It starts to bug out. But this is what we see a lot of our end users have their setups on. They set it and they forget it, right? And so what I wanted to talk about is actually what that looks like from the logical perspective. And so I guess I'm pointing a lot to my television today. I didn't realize that, but this was from yesterday, and this is what I like because we're going to demo. Pointy end up, flamey end down. This is Boca Chica. This is SpaceX. I live on Padre Island. This is South Padre Island. So I always watch the launches. This is Everyday Astronaut. This one had a great takeoff. They had to work on the landing a little bit, but I just thought that was a great thing. So let's look at my machine real quick, the one I'm actually talking to you and doing this video on. And of course, go into PowerShell, right? Just to show this is the type of device I have, right? The 5532-in-1 Dell. And here's my NIC. And then right off the bat, signal 82%. What does that mean, right? So have a look at my wireless. All right. Already I've got an issue going on, right? So this is PowerShell from Windows 10, and this is off the Windows 10 operating system. I've got this guy saying that I've got a signal of 82%. What actually does that mean? And then I'm showing 4 bars. Now think of this as your people that you might have to support on the daily working from home, right? Well, I've got a great connection. We'll do you, right? So to dig into this further, I again have Mobileye installed on this machine, and just to set expectations, this is the device. And even though I've set up my hardware like a non-Wi-Fi engineer should, just to kind of prove the points and all that kind of jazz, I have been able to fix some of the things in the logical of how things work. And this is what I want to throw to you guys. So I'm just looking at basically a day. And the device I'm talking to you guys right now is being steadily on the 5 gig band. And you'll notice that I really don't have a lot of channel utilization in my area, right? So I have a nice clean channel frequency. I'm going to show you guys what the average person's looks like here in a second, and it's pretty shocking. but I'm connected to AC most of the time, or almost all the time. Not much has changed except for I've changed NICs a couple of times. So here's an example of the NICs. This is the one that I actually showed you guys at one time that I had, and then here's the one that I actually use that's in the box. Now, I had mentioned about upgrading and keeping things advanced. Any guesses to how old this wireless NIC is, right? So if I go and I look into Intel, its first launch date when these guys were available was in the first quarter of 2016. I haven't had that device this long, and the earliest review I could see when I got this was in 2018. So right off the bat, I've got a device that is 3 years old, which is about average. Most people use a laptop for about 5 years. A laptop's lifespan is actually about, when I say lifespan, by the time something else is going to be replaced into it, from my days at Dell, it's about six to 8 months in consumer grade. So I have a 3-year-old laptop that's business class, it's precision, and I have almost possibly a 5-year-old NIC. So if I went and looked at the other one that I had, which I bought, this is kind of fun. Do a little Google search here, and you know you're in trouble when by the 5th result it starts to say problems, right? That's probably why I have it as an example instead of actually having it plugged in. But the only really information I could get from this network interface was actually from the Amazon that still sells it. So bear with me, but you'll notice it's AC as well, and you can see on my timeline with Mobileye, I've been connected with that. But again, look at the data rates, right? So the data rates on this one, pretty small, but with the one that came with my PC, has a little bit better data rates. Of course, these aren't real world speeds, but why is that? Because of spatial streams. So the idea that I want you guys to I'm trying to hammer in is that just even the NIC settings and it having different spatial streams, even being on the same AC can be completely sometimes a different experience, right? And it's very important to realize what that network interface is, what that driver version is, because it's going to be coming into play with the consumer grade. And as we're talking about things from the client level, which is only what we've talked about now, let's talk about the environment. So in my environment, again, you guys saw the ugly picture. This is what it looks like in the air. So I have a 2200, which is actually behind me, which I think it reverses it, but it's over here. And then I have a 2100 that's next to, or basically behind the TV. And you can see with the 2100, I've got a nice little 2.4 spacing, which I'm very proud of. I've got my mesh network. I have the bane of my Wi-Fi existence is my printer that is sitting directly behind me, which has the wireless access point turned off, but is still broadcasting. And it's also a node connected to my Google network, which is a super secure violation. Bane of my existence, Jim. If I didn't have to print so much for my kids, I would do something. But it is there. Why does this matter? Right? Because here, not that big of a deal. But just within a few feet, literally a few feet of where that device is, where I am now, my mesh node over here is actually getting interfered with by a neighbor. And so this guy right here is right on 8, and it's a nice 20 megahertz wide channel, right? 5, 10, 15, 20, center channel's 8. If you look at my lights here, you can tell that, he is interfering with my mesh network for my node that covers about half the house here. And to look at that another way, again, Winfi, I go through all the free tools and some of the paid tools. You can find them as well. This shows great information. Here's that 51 dBm strength. Remember at the beginning, PowerShell said we had 83% signal, and Wi-Fi said we have 100, but my RSI is 51. Right? You can pick up this information and you can see this data. So it's really good to have. Before I had this information, I had, and most customers do, I had my 2G here actually set to auto. Now it's nice and clean because most consumer grade routers, which this one's Spectrum, I can actually go and change the control channel. Do I need to do that on 5? Whoops, excuse me. Well, if I go and look at my 5 is pretty decent. So I'm happy to say, as a 7-signal Wi-Fi employee and engineer, that my RF plan looks pretty nice. And I can say with 5G, on the 5G band, is that I can sit and let it do its auto negotiation, right? There's nothing really happening that I need to make changes to. Wi-Fi moves and changes all the time. So I didn't make these changes just on a flip. I looked at my Wi-Fi for a month to see where things were happening. And then I realized, I'm like, you know what? My 2.4 gig on the Minton 2.4 is always going to be interfering if it's set to remote to my mesh network, because for some reason that's where it went. And then also I had a neighbor who I can't do anything about was also there. So after a while looking at it, it was always there. I moved it to 1, and now my 2.4 goes great. Now, do I need 2.4? No, I don't. You know, some of the longer distances, maybe I could use it, but it basically just sits there. I suggest, and again, this is the tips and tricks, if you don't need 2.4, turn it off. If you need it and it's having some interference, which you can see from a tool, you should be able to walk your customers, or you should be able to set the center channel to get it away, or set the power down. And we'll talk about that here in a second, right? So looking at my space again, about the 2.4, you know, this guy's right here in 8. Again, it's my neighbor. I can't do anything about it. Again, I've got the ability to, since I've got Wi-Fi sensors, I did a deep scan before we started this call, and I can actually see, you know, where it is. But here's my saving grace, is that it's actually pretty far away, right? So again, it's an eyesore, but, you know, not that big of a deal. So in net, what I do to keep my work from home, my RF clean, is I make sure that my Wi-Fi home router is upgraded. I take it in every six months and say, hey, cable provider company, do you have a new one? And they usually do. I keep the firmware updated. Things like Google, I'm not sure about the Nest, but some of the mesh networks, they don't sometimes allow you to do configuration changes. And they don't even let you to push firmware. They basically do it all on their own. But I make sure that my firmware is up on the latest and the greatest, right? And being able to identify what my air looks like and what my devices are capable of. And then also identifying things. One of the easiest things you can do, and one of the hardest and most frustrating from work from home, is when somebody has just like this, a consumer grade Wi-Fi access point, and they have a 2.4 and they have a 5, and what they do is they don't they just call the BS or the SSID the same name. It becomes very difficult to know when you actually physically move from bands from 2.4 to 5 if you have the same SSID name. So easy trick, just put 2G or 5G next to the actual SSID name. And especially if you're watching devices, especially with Mobileye or other products, you can actually see if that device moves on 2.4. And as you guys know, roaming, that's, you know, on a 5 network is decent roaming on a 2.4. But if you roam from a 2.4, you bands here up to a 5, it's actually a network reset, right? It's going to cause contention. And also, if you have a 2.4 network that has the same name, and you are a pretty good distance or signal strength, you will drop from that BSSID on 5 gig and you'll go to 2.4 and not really know right off the bat because you're looking at the same SSID name, right? So it's a nice little tip and trick. So let's look at this.
Chris,
go ahead,
one
Jim.
other thing you can do there, it's really an opportunity for a social engineering trick when you're naming your SSID. So you could call your 5 gigahertz SSID Minton Fast or Minton Premium or Minton Enterprise or something. And then the 2.4 gigahertz one, you could name Minton Slow or Minton Legacy or Minton IoT or something like that. And that gives users that, maybe aren't aware of the characteristics of the different bands, and understanding, I want to be on the fast network, not the old or the slow network. So that can be helpful.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And then when you're angry at someone, you can deduct them down to the slow network, right? You can say you're in timeout, right?
Yep.
Great feedback. So I've shown you what as a Wi-Fi guy looks like and what I've been able to do. Let's talk about people that are not in the IT space and that are having to work from home. And I have 3 examples here from real users. And these are the cleanest usually of what we see on the daily. In here, we have somebody in an apartment on the 2.4. It is just stacked with SSIDs, right? Usually, and this is a clean one compared to, we've seen stuff that just looks like a Jason Pollock painting, especially when it's just everywhere. We have people that will bond 2.4 channels that will overlap, just ridiculous stuff. So this one is actually decent in the fact that they're just nice and stacked on top of each other. On the 5, for another user, we see the same. Again, this is a nice one because we're not seeing huge overlapping, bonded channels. We're just seeing, these 20 megahertz wide channels right on top of each other. Notice all of these channels that are completely not in use. And this is when I come back to the point, if you have the ability to set a center channel, especially in a consumer grade network device, do it. Because what happens is when you're in an apartment, the same settings for these, in my case, Spectrum Link or other consumer grade Wi-Fi routers, they'll basically just sit right on top of each other. So floor by floor, there'll be all these other channels available. And everybody in your neighbors will have basically the same service, even sometimes the same modem, set to use the exact same auto feature, and that auto feature will just sit there and just ride right on top of each other. And it's not just in people's apartments or high density area. This is somebody's house. So in this example, in somebody's house, I think there's 37 SSIDs that this device could hear, all different SSID names, all on the same channels, just stacked right on top of each other. So the net of this is that you need to be able to see this information, and you need to be able to identify, what's going on. It is, in the Wi-Fi world, is completely mindset different than how wired connects, and it's always in flux. Doesn't mean you need to have wireless sensors and all that stuff like, every few feet, but you do need to make sure that you have some way, or your customer has some way, the ability of seeing what the airspace is, not just how your device is interacting or your other devices are interacting, but also how other people's devices are interacting in the same medium and in the same airspace. You're able to identify that and identify, what the devices are capable of. Then you can make a plan to move people this way or set power changes just to be able to basically get along. And then that brings us to my basically closing point is, understand what your client NIC capabilities are and your Wi-Fi router. Keep your stuff updated. Firmware makes a lot of changes. It's a software world, and it's amazing what firmware can fix. And I'd care to wonder how old everybody's cable modems are that they get. I've known people that I think 8 years is the longest one I've ever known. But people will keep those devices, and they usually will only turn in their cable, their cable equipment if they move or if they move to another service, right? I take my stuff up to the spot and say, hey, I'm ready for an upgrade. And they just hand me like, okay, this is the newest cable modem. I'm like, thank you. Here's the newest access point. Thank you. And then purchasing one like Google Nest or Wi-Fi, again, I keep these till about 3 years or so, and then I go ahead and upgrade, right? So some nice little tips and tricks that we talked about. Jimmy made a great point on that. Turning down settings, you have the ability, right? And then basically keep your software current, and continuously have something to monitor the environment. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Q&A.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Lots of good questions and comments from the audience. I want to encourage anybody else out there with a question just to drop it in the question pane. Question here from Terry, who, while you were talking about the differences between bands, he said, unfortunately, most smart quote-unquote devices are using 802.11b radios, so turning off 2.4 is not possible.
That's right. That's right. So in that instance, again, know your environment. That's great. I like the air quotes with smart. 2.4 has been around for a long time, and it's going to continue to go. The only thing you can really do with that is now mess with the channel plans and the power settings, right?
Yeah, I've had that same experience. I had a nice and pure and clean 5 gigahertz only home network for a while. I thought 2.4 gigahertz was dead, and then I started getting all this IoT stuff.
Yeah.
Just that is 2.4 gigahertz only, and it's very slow. And honestly, if that stuff's using 2.4 gigahertz, that's fine. It doesn't have demanding performance requirements. So 2.4 gigahertz is back, and it's here to stay. Question from Kendall about your home network design, Chris. So Kendall says, why are you using both the Spectrum and the Google Wireless instead of just one?
That's a great point. I use it for testing and for labs. And sometimes I will break things, right? And I want to be able to identify, some type of stuff in the environment. So I like to keep those up and running. I used to have a problem, kind of like the first person's question, when my Apple phones would not go to the 5 gig band no matter what you did. They just stuck to 2.4. So I had, just like Jim, I had my 2.4 turned off for a long time and then turned it on because the iPhones just seem to want to just always be on 2.4 and have problems with 5. That's been remedied. I have no idea why. Maybe a firmware update. I still have the same phones. They don't have that problem anymore. But I like to keep the options open and then use it for testing, right? I'd like to add one thing too, is that, and Jim, I probably talked to you this a while. It's been a while, but in the consumer router that I had, you can actually turn off the SSID, and from a general user's perspective, it just says turn off 2.4 SSID, turn it off, don't broadcast it. Or you would think that means turn off the radio, but the 2.4 and the 5 gig radio, they're still running. So you actually have to go and do a next step and actually turn the radios off, which is, can trip people up, right?
It's a nice configuration option though, because then you might have your normal SSID that's 5 gigahertz only, and you might have a IoT or junk SSID that's 2.4 gigahertz only. And then you could have a third SSID that was dual band. If you needed that for some use case. So it does give you some flexibility. Okay, a couple more questions. Question from Chris about how does 7 Signal handle GDPR. We do have GDPR. We do address all those concerns in both of our solutions, Sapphire Eye and Mobile Eye. So reach out to get more information on that. Question from Abe about how how do we address Apple devices using private MAC addresses as a safety measure? Chris, you see that affecting home network design at all?
If you're doing MAC filtering, it can be a bother, right? If you're tracing your device through some type of tool, sometimes it can be a bother. I have it disabled. I haven't used it, but I have in my setups a lot of MAC filtering based on parental controls, and I would be hesitant about it. And for me personally, there is so much information that Google and Apple and everybody gets and gleans from the devices. I'm just like, you can have the Mac. What about you, Jim? Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, I don't like to do anything based on MAC addresses and Wi-Fi, not just because of MAC address randomization, which is on by default now for newer Android and Apple iOS clients, but also because it's easy. It's trivial to spoof a MAC address and change it, and to get around whatever security was using that. So try and avoid that. If you want to have a kid's SSID and everyone on the SSID MAC address, independent of their MAC address, has certain restrictions, that's one way to address that. But yeah, try not to build MAC addresses into your workflows too much. Maybe just time for one more question, and this is a good one from Iman, and I apologize if I got that name wrong, but he says, do old 802.11b printers impact 2.4 gigahertz if the network card is not disabled?
That's a good one.
Yeah, so interesting question. If it's specifically 802.11b, it will trigger the protection mechanisms for all the other APs operating on that channel in 2.4 gigahertz. If they're 802.11n, they'll enable some protection mechanisms to make sure that other older clients, legacy clients, can still contend for the medium, and that actually reduces the efficiency of Wi-Fi operating on that channel. And you don't need any clients on that 802.11b SSID from that printer. Many APs will turn on their protection mechanisms just based on seeing another beacon frame from an AP that's 802.11b, for instance. So it's a good idea to disable that if you're not using it, and you can. But I think that's all the time we have, Kelsey.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you to all of you who dropped those questions in. A lot of great feedback from the audience today. We love hearing from you all. And thank you to all of you for joining us and giving us 45 minutes out of your workday to really dive into this topic. So thank you, Chris, for your wonderful presentation. Thanks, Jim, as always. And we hope to see all of you at next week's webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Kelsey.
Bye, everyone.